In April, I preached a sermon about the life and legacy of the genderqueer and non-binary poet Andrea Gibson. Assigned female at birth, Gibson later embraced they/them pronouns as a more authentic expression of who they were. On this first Sunday in Pride Month, I invite you to hear one of Andrea's poems titled Andrew. When I was a kid, I would sometimes secretly call myself Andrew. I would tug at the crotch of my pants the way only pubescent boys do. Ran around pounding my bare chest like Tarzan. And it's not that I thought I would grow up to be a man. I just didn't think I'd grow up to be a woman either. From what I could tell, neither of those categories fit me. But believe me, I knew from a very young age never to say, "Hey, Dad, this Adam and Eve thing isn't really working for me." I mean, what about all those people in between? In the third grade, Lynette asked me where all my Barbies were. I lied and told her I got in trouble, so my mom took them away. I didn't dare say, "Barbie sucks, Lynette." And for that matter, Timmy, so does G.I. Joe. I want to grow into something none of us have ever seen before. And gender is just one of those ways that we're boxed and labeled before we're ever able to speak who we dream we are, who we believe we'll become. Like drum beats forever changing their rhythm, I am living today as someone I had not yet become yesterday. And tonight I will borrow only pieces of who I was today to carry with me tomorrow. Tell me that we'll be naming our children beautiful and nothing else. Tell Barbie she can go now. Tell G.I. Joe to put his gun down and find a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a girl boyfriend. Y'all, G.I. Joe just needs a friend. I mean, he's plastic, and not even the kind of plastic that bends. And I want to bend in 1,000 directions, like the sun does, like love does, like time stopped so the hand of the clock could hold each other as we held each other, like I held these words for too many years on the tip of my tongue. Love me, love me, love me, whoever I am, whoever I become. At its heart, Andrea Gibson's poem, it's just a plea for freedom, the freedom to become and the freedom to be. It's a vision of a world where no human being is forced into boxes that don't fit, a world where each person's inherent worth and dignity are honored, a world where people are free to tell the truth about who they are without fear. It is a world that I want my 3-year-old son to inherit. And it always struck me as, I'll just say this out loud. I've said it out loud once before from the pulpit. Every time people ask, is it a girl or a boy? I'm like, you're asking about my child's genitals and it's creepy. Like, why does it matter? It's an infant. Many members of this congregation are transgender or non-binary or have close friends and family members who are. The questions before us today are not abstract. They are about safety, dignity, belonging, and the freedom to live openly as who you are. Yet many transgender Americans, those freedoms have come under sustained attack. Over the past year and a half, transgender Americans have faced one of the most sweeping waves of legal and political attacks in modern American history. One of the first major actions came on the second Trump administration's very first day in office, an executive order declaring that the federal government would recognize only 2 sexes, fixed at birth, and would no longer recognize gender identity in many areas of federal policy. This order affected everything from passports to prisons to shelters to federal programs and civil rights protections. For many transgender folks, the message was painful and direct. Who you know yourself to be is not who the current government recognizes you to be. Human Rights Watch warned that the order amounted to an effort to erase transgender people from public life. Next, the administration sought to restrict access to gender-affirming care for transgender youth through funding cuts, through investigations and regulations. Hospitals around the country received federal subpoenas seeking patient information, and some providers curtailed services amid growing legal pressure. For many transgender youth and their families, the result was fear and uncertainty about access to care essential to their physical health and to their mental well-being. Another major target was removing transgender Americans from military service, including many who had already served honorably for years. The Supreme Court has allowed that ban to take effect while the legal challenges proceed. For many transgender troops and their families, this policy has meant a possible loss of career, a livelihood, and the opportunity to continue serving their country. Then, on March 31st, literally on Transgender Day of Visibility, of all days, the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 against Colorado's ban on conversion therapy for minors. Conversion therapy is the practice of attempting to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity, and it has been rejected by major medical and mental health organizations as ineffective and as harmful. Transgender folks comprise roughly 1% of the United States population, yet over the past year and a half, they have found themselves at the center of an extraordinary number of political challenges, legal battles, and media controversies. For many transgender folks, that has meant having the fear of their identity debated daily, their rights questioned regularly, and their very existence treated as a challenge for public debate. It is difficult to overstate the emotional burden of living under that kind of scrutiny day after day. It is not an exaggeration to describe the current assault on transgender rights as a moral panic. Fear is outrunning evidence. A vulnerable minority is being scapegoated, and a small number of people are being blamed for fears and anxieties that run much deeper. To explain how I have come to think about transgender rights as I do, let me share just a bit of my own story. Come with me back to the early 1990s. Who remembers it with me? All right, wasn't that long ago. I was a high school student in Florence, South Carolina, the buckle of the Bible Belt, or part of it. From the pulpit of my Southern Baptist church, I was hearing things like, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, literally from the pulpit on Sunday morning. But at school, I naturally gravitated to the drama club crowd, and that meant being friends with Brock, the only out gay student at my high school. Brock gave me an early front row seat to the incredible amount of courage it takes to live authentically when your identity is willfully misunderstood, stigmatized, and treated as a problem to be solved. Fast forward to the mid-2000s, and I was serving as the associate pastor at a small liberal Baptist church in Northeast Louisiana, Monroe, if any of you know it, one of the most politically conservative, Duck Dynasty, anybody? One of the most politically conservative places in the country. More than a decade before same-sex marriage became legal nationwide, gay and lesbian couples would periodically contact our congregation because they had heard through the grapevine that we were basically the only congregation anywhere nearby that was supportive of LGBTQ plus rights. I had the honor of officiating a number of same-sex weddings during that time in which I spoke these words. This marriage is not an act of protest or a political statement. It is an expression of hope. The hope that a marriage blessed publicly by one's spiritual community is meaningful even without the government's stamp of approval. And the institution of marriage could not receive a more profound defense than that. Those couples taught me something important. That when a right is denied to a minority, the people on the outside often see a political controversy. The people directly affected experience it as something much more personal. Just the desire to love openly, to belong fully, and to have their humanity recognized. During that same period, I found myself ministering to a number of couples in which one spouse was struggling to come out as gay or lesbian. This also happened in seminary with many of my classmates. Ann Buxton reflects on the larger lessons of these experiences in her classic book, The Other Side of the Closet, The Coming Out Crisis for Straight Spouses and Families. One of Buxton's central insights is that these stories are about much more than sexuality. They are about what happens when people feel compelled to hide essential parts of themselves to fit social expectations. The result is often pain for everyone involved. Not only for the person living behind a mask, but also for spouses, children, and families built around a version of reality that cannot be sustained indefinitely because it is a lie. When people are forced to conceal who they are, everyone pays a price. Honesty may be costly, but the cost of denying who you are is far, far greater. The lessons of those years have shaped how I think about transgender rights today. I am much less interested in ideological arguments, and I am much more interested in the human consequences of asking people to suppress or deny who they are. Again and again, I have seen honesty open the door to the possibility of healing, while secrecy and shame deepen suffering and have twisted, terrible consequences. In Unitarian Universalism, we often speak about the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Part of that search involves discovering and expressing the truth about who we are, and each of us can only do that for ourselves. And I have a deep respect for the courage it takes to tell the truth about yourself in a world that may not always welcome that truth. And this story is far from over. Later this month, the Supreme Court will rule on a case involving state bans on transgender athletes participating in girls' and women's sports. Reading the tea leaves, many legal observers expect the court to uphold the bans. Regardless of the verdict, consider that less than 0.5% of high school athletes are transgender, approximately 0.44%. Yet this wildly disproportionate amount of political energy has been devoted to regulating this tiny population. If you're curious to learn more, I recommend the book, Let Us Play, Winning the Battle for Gender Diverse Athletes. It's published last year by our Unitarian Universalist Association's own Beacon Press. Its authors are Harrison Brown, the first openly transgender professional hockey player, and Rachel Brown, an award-winning journalist. One of the reasons I appreciate books like this one is that they allow transgender athletes to speak for themselves. In contrast, a recent study of thousands of news stories about transgender athletes found that conservative lawmakers were almost always quoted directly, while fewer than 2% of those stories quoted a transgender athlete. Fewer than 2%. When we talk about groups of people without listening to them, misunderstanding is almost inevitable. You begin to think it's willful misunderstanding. And when transgender athletes are given an opportunity to speak for themselves, what they say is often remarkably simple. As swimmer Leah Thomas put it, trans people don't transition for athletics. We transition to be happy and authentic and our true selves. That may sound obvious, but it is easy to lose sight of. The overwhelming majority of transgender folks are not asking to become political symbols. They are simply trying to live honest lives, to be recognized for who they are, to participate in their communities, and to pursue the same hopes and dreams as everyone else. And notice how often the debate is framed as fairness in sports, as if fairness in sports were simple and straightforward. But sports have never been perfectly fair. Every athlete arrives with a different set of advantages and disadvantages. Some are born with extraordinary height. strength, speed, lung capacity, or hand-eye coordination. Some have access to elite coaching, expensive equipment, private trainers, and year-round competition. Others do not. Success in sports has always reflected this complicated mix of natural ability, hard work, opportunity, resources, and luck. I was born to be a linebacker, right? So of course, fairness matters, but we should be skeptical whenever fairness suddenly becomes the alleged overriding concern in discussions involving a tiny and vulnerable minority. If we were truly concerned about fairness in sports, then we should be focusing on unequal funding, unequal facilities, and the many other barriers that prevent people of all ages and all genders from reaching their full athletic potential. In the end, the most important question is not who wins a race or makes a team. The most important question is whether transgender people will be treated as full and equal members of society. So as we navigate another election season, pay attention. Which politicians are actually showing moral leadership? Who is speaking and stoking the language of fear, and who is speaking the language of freedom, safety, and dignity for all? There is so much more to say, but I want to end where I began, with a poem by Andrea Gibson. This one is titled Swing Set, and it reflects on their experience working with young children. "Are you a boy or a girl?" he asks, staring up at me in all 3 feet of his puddin-face grandeur. And I say, "Dylan, you've been in this class for 3 years, and you still don't know if I'm a boy or a girl?" "Uh-huh." "Well, at this point, I don't really think it matters, do you?" No. Can I have a push on the swing?" And this happens every day. It is a tidal wave of kindergarten curiosity, rushing straight for the rocks of me, whatever I am. In the class, when we discuss the Milky Way galaxy, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and kids, do you know that some of the stars that we see when we look up in the sky are so far away that they've already burned out? What do you think of that, Timmy? My mom says that even though you've got hairs that grow from your legs and the hair on your head is short and pokey, and you smell really bad like my dad, that you're still a girl." Thank you, Timmy. And so it goes. On the playground, she stares up at me from behind her pink powder puff sunglasses and asks, "Do you have a boyfriend?" And I say no, and she says, "Oh, well, do you have a girlfriend?" And I say no. But if by some miracle, 20 years from now, I ever finally do, I will bring her by to meet you. How's that? Okay, can I have a push on the swing? And that's the thing. They don't care. They don't care. Us, on the other hand, my father, sitting across the table at Christmas dinner, gritting his teeth over his still full plate, his appetite scraped away by the intrusion of my haircut. "What were you thinking? You used to be such a pretty girl." Then, of course, there's always the somehow not quite bright enough fluorescent light in the public restroom. Sir, do you realize this is a ladies' room?" "Yes, ma'am, I do. It's just that I don't feel fully comfortable sticking this tampon up my penis in the men's room." But the best is always the mother at the market whispering, "Don't stare, it's rude." And I want to say, listen, lady, the only rude thing I see here is your paranoid parental hand putting aside the best education on self-love that this little girl's ever going to get. Because tomorrow I start my day with 28 little minds who know a hell of a lot more than you do. And if I show up in a pink, frilly dress, those kids, they won't love me any more, and they won't love me any less. Hey, are you a boy or a... Never mind. Can I have a push on the swing? And y'all, someday, Someday when we grow up, it's really going to be that simple. Building a world like that is nothing less than answering the call of love.